Actually, to move faster, you need to build trust. And to build trust, you need governance. And so this became just kind of has become my mantra, right? Which is governance enables trust and trust enables speed and adoption, right? And
Hey there, welcome back to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I am the Human Capitalist Trent Cotton, and I have got the guru of all things compliance. And I had a fantastic conversation with him. And Guru, I do have to tell you that two things, actually. Number one, always position you as the most excitable and relatable compliance person I've ever talked to in my career. And I spent most of my career in banking. And then the other is I had on Talent Llama not too long ago, and we were talking about bias and governance and everything, and he gave a shout out. And so you got like a 5-minute plug between the two of us just talking about how awesome you are. So welcome to the show.
hey, Trent, thanks for having me. And on that note, I will say we are working with Talent Llama, and gonna give a plug and a shout out to them as well. So,
Yeah, they have a
we'll talk about
pretty
it. I
cool.
never heard of myself described as an excitable compliance guy, so I'm very,
You
very
are.
curious to see how this audience perceives me. So,
Yeah, you've got to that needs to be your tagline on LinkedIn and on your business cards, right? The the excitable, relatable compliance guy. So I know your background, but why don't you kind of share your career and what you're doing now? Because I think that's going to set up our conversation really well.
yeah, I definitely never would have ever imagined going into the compliance and governance space. So, but that also tells you how careers can turn and change, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
I've been in the AI space for over 25 years, Trent. I started that, actually, my time in academia is where I started in AI. The fun story is I used to be a bit of a chess player in high school. And when I was in high school, Deep Blue, for those of you who remember this or are chess fans, Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov in 1997. It was a very seminal moment of like a computer defeating a human. And so AI has been around for quite some time, right? And it's taken on different forms. The AI of Deep Blue was very, very different than the AI that we have today. In fact, when I went and studied AI back in undergrad at Stanford, I was told not to do deep learning, right? Because for good reasons, right? Deep learning requires a lot of data and a lot of compute, and we didn't have that back then. So the deep learning algorithms were not very good back then, and so it's a very different set of techniques to do AI. Well, long story short, I spent some time in academia, researched AI, and then really decided to go into industry. And I've spent the last dozen years at McKinsey and Capital One leading AI teams and building AI solutions. And to this whole point around compliance, compliance was kind of an annoyance. And I think for a lot of people,
Yeah.
it can be sometimes, right? You're like, "Oh, they're getting in my way. I wanted to move faster. I wanted to move faster." And I felt like compliance was slowing me down until I had a realization where actually, to move faster, you need to build trust. And to build trust, you need governance. And so this became just kind of has become my mantra, right? Which is governance enables trust and trust enables speed and adoption, right? And so for people who are innovators out there who feel like compliance is slowing them down, or people in compliance who feel like folks are going too fast on the other side, governance is the bridge between the two. And so I wanted to go invest in governance. And so, I've been involved in AI governance for some time now. And what I wanted to do and our mission at Fair Now is to simplify governance for folks, because for everyone's investing in AI now, but they don't quite know what governance looks like. And they don't, I think, even realize how complicated governance is going to be, how manual it can be, how time consuming it can be. And so we built a technology to simplify governance, to automate aspects of governance, so you guys can then build that trust and that adoption and innovate and go forth.
Makes sense. One of my previous companies, we had a VC arm. So I was responsible for it was like an incubator, and it was in the fintech space, but the bank was I was going to say overlord, but they were kind of like the ones that were ultimately responsible. So you had traditional banking trying to apply their compliance standards to startups in the fintech space. And I usually sat somewhere in between. So it's definitely a need there. It's speed to market, but you need to make sure that you're doing it correctly.
That's right. That's right. And look, I think the key is good governance, right? You can have overwhelming governance and that just ends up being sand in the gears. But then you can also have too little And then you don't build the trust and the buy-in, and you take on a lot of risk, right? And so the analogy I
Mm-hmm.
give often, Trent, is imagine you wake up today and all the laws around motor vehicles have gone away. There's no speed limits anymore. There are no traffic cops. Anybody can drive, so no driver license checks or anything like that. And no DUI laws, no seatbelts, all the protective stuff, sensors, seatbelts, all that stuff is gone. Imagine how likely you'd be to go in and hop in your car and go out and take a long drive, right? You'd be
Yeah.
terrified, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so good governance done well, actually, you don't even think about it when you drive now. Like how much governance is out there that kind of is there to make it safer for us, right?
Yeah.
And so AI is like that kind of technology, right? Where it's incredibly powerful, has a ton of potential, but can derail you. And so you get that right kind of governance and you can manage that risk while harness the upside.
Well, apparently you've never driven in Atlanta because even though there are governance rules, there is no speed limit. There is no common sense. Well, Guru, I love to ask the same two questions to every guest because there's a lot of commonalities. There's like a thread of common, but then everybody has kind of a different take.
Uh-huh.
So the first one is, you and I have kind of talked about the view of HR, that I look at it as human capital rather than managing resources. So if you were to look forward over the next 1 to 5 years, what do you see that's changing in the world of human capital?
I think a couple things that I'm going to talk about a trend that's been there for a couple of years now, and then what I think is also going to be the big deal going forward, right? I think the trend of HR being seen as more strategic, I think is going to continue, right? I think this started in the 5-6 years ago. You were starting to see the investments in data and technology in the HR space, maybe even going back 10 years, right? Starting to see CHROs being part of the executive council, being reporting directly to the CEO, not kind of a side off into a COO or something like that. And just seeing it being more talent being seen as strategic, talent being seen as a differentiator, talent being seen as a competitive advantage, and therefore HR being seen as a competitive advantage. I think that trend's going to, and that picked up in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
right? With kind of COVID, working from home, remote work, hybrid work, all of that stuff around productivity and how do you redesign work, as well as DEI, and kind of that went up, and maybe that's going down now. But just kind of a bunch of topics all coming together over the last 3, 4, 5 years that really again highlighted the strategic importance of HR. And I think you're going to continue to see that now with AI. Right. And I think that strategic importance of AI really comes into force where HR can play a huge role on a couple of dimensions, not just for HR, but at the organizational level, at the company level. So I'll give you a few things here. One is helping on governance, right? HR should have a voice in how companies deploy AI, right? What are
Okay.
the red lines? What are the ethics policies? What are the governance? Because at the end of the day, HR is used to implementing kind of cultural governance for the organization, right?
Right.
Well, AI is just an extension of that, right? AI is going to take on certain tasks. It's going to automate certain things. It's going to start doing certain things. Well, as a company, do we want that to do that? Do we want humans to be out of the decision-making loop on that? That involves process redesign and workflow, right? All that kind of stuff. But the first thing is, are we comfortable having an AI system make those decisions or automate these tasks? That, I think HR has a huge role to play in being part of that and that governance of what's allowed and what's not allowed in their organization. The second thing is,
And
yeah,
before you go to the second thing, so are you thinking not because I know if someone's listening, they're probably thinking the governance you're talking about and the questions that you're asking is more of within the HR department. But am I to understand you talking this is cross functionally?
obviously HR should have their own views on within HR,
Oh,
right?
totally. Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%, right? And you see that, right? I think we're going to spend some time in this conversation talking about the way AI is coming into
Mm-hmm.
HR. But my thought and hope is HR is involved, has a seat at the table. I'm not saying they set the rules for the organization, but has a seat at the table, has input to shape how AI is used across the company.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I never
right.
thought about that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And so this role of governance, and I think in general, right? I think the key thing, HR is going to be involved in a bunch of different spots across the company. Governance is one. The other is work redesign. If you're bringing AI into your workflows at a company, that is going to necessitate redesigning how that work happens, where do humans step back? Where do humans lean in? Where do humans work with the AI together? How does the decision get made? All of that's going to change slightly, right? And so that work redesign is then going to necessitate changing people's roles. So role redesign. It's going to necessitate changing job descriptions of people you go hire, right? It's going to necessitate change management, right? So all of this, right, which I call kind of part and parcel of like adopting a new technology, is workflow redesign. Is all of these things. HR should be involved in that. So again, I think we're going to talk about AI and HR, but before we even get there, I think HR should be involved in these two things at the organization level: AI governance and the workflow redesign that entails a bunch of other things: role design, job description redesign, change management, all that stuff, when AI gets implemented. So I think HR has a huge role to play, huge opportunity to play. That also means leaders in HR, like CHROs, etc., need to upskill and educate themselves and become experts on these topics, so they're taken, their input is taken seriously at the organizational level as well.
No, that's great advice. I did a video about just predictions that I had for 2030 with HR, and one of them it was one of those times where the idea came out, and as I'm talking about it, I'm going, I don't know if that really makes a lot of sense, but I talked about how HR would own part of the AI governance, and I was like,
Yeah.
well, no one's probably going to get to that part of the video, but it makes me feel better that someone as smart as
Yeah.
you is actually kind of thinking the same. Because I do feel like, maybe not in small organizations, but your enterprise level, I could almost see there being an AI compliance, I hate that word, but like an AI officer that's in
Yeah,
charge of the compliance
absolutely.
and the strategy for each
Absolutely.
different department, right?
Absolutely. Yep. AI governance is
Yeah.
going to be a huge field, Trent.
Mhm.
And right now it's in the very early stages. A few leading companies have started hiring for AI governance roles, a head of AI governance, manager of AI governance, etc. But I actually think this is going to be a fast growing space, a set of skills, job roles. And so I do encourage people to become educated both within their own role on this topic, but also as new roles get created. And here's the reason, look, I play with this AI technology constantly, and the technology is getting incredibly sophisticated. Now, I often talk about this. Just because the technology is amazing doesn't mean it gets implemented right away. This is where all of the hard work, there's two dimensions to innovation. One is the actual technological innovation. The other is what I call implementation innovation, figuring out how are you actually going to use that technology in your day-to-day work, in your company, in your decision making, in your workflow, all of that stuff, right? So that's the hard work that companies are going to have to figure out over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, right?
Yeah.
But it's going to happen. It's going to happen, Trent. And AI is going to start automating a bunch of things. So then it becomes a role. What role do humans play in this, right? And even if you want to
Right.
go, let's say 20 years out, what roles are humans going to play? And there's like 2 or 3 things that I think humans will always play. One is accountability. Okay. You can imagine a world where AI is doing all the things for us, right? At the end of the day, if it goes wrong, who does the customer call? They have to be able to call a human, right? And
Yeah.
say, okay, Guru, this AI messed up. It did this wrong. What are you going to do to fix it? Right. So there has to be human accountability at the end of the day. So humans are going to have to manage that. It's almost like you might have an army of AI bots, right? Or agents or whatever, but you got to manage them. You have to remediate concerns. You have to fix things. You have to govern it, right? So accountability is important. The second thing is ethics. AI does not have ethics, right? At the end of the day, we set the course for where we use it, when we don't use it, what it does, what it doesn't do, all of those things, right? And then the third thing is guidance, right? Like really like teaching it, guiding it, because it doesn't improve on its own. It improves with guidance, right? And so, and that's what we're seeing now. It's called reinforcement learning and human-based reinforcement learning and all that kind of stuff. So guidance, accountability, and ethics are 3 areas where humans are going to be very, very involved in AI. I think, futuristic. And so I think all of us should learn this technology, understand how it works, and start to develop a view on what those dimensions look like.
I do find it ironic that one of the things that's going to help AI get better is feedback. And that's one of the things that most people in HR are trying to get leaders to give their employees. So I'm just like, the irony here,
Well, you know
Uh,
what? It's always easier to give feedback to an AI system than to a human, right? Like that you
oh,
have to
oh
you have
gosh,
to deal with
yes.
emotions or
Oh,
complexities and all
yes.
of that, right? The AI is always, if
Absolutely.
you've interacted with any of them, you give it feedback. It's always like, yeah, happy to take your
Yeah.
feedback, right? So
Yeah. Thanks for the feedback. Let me
exactly.
adjust. Oh my God,
I wish
if
people
team
could be
members
like
that I
that. Yeah,
coached, right?
exactly.
And I'm talking professionally and personally. If people would modulate their behavior, that'd be great. Um, all right, so let's kind of zero in on the HR side. I'm a CHRO. I have been, and I hear this story a lot. I have been charged by the COO, the CFO, whomever. We need to draw. We usually it's we need to drive cost savings by leveraging AI. We need an AI policy. We need an AI strategy. Um, what are some guidelines or some frameworks that you advise or would advise someone in HR that kind of that ensures that innovation aligns with those ethical practices and risk management that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah. Yeah, I often talk about this. I think there's four pillars that I use when
Okay.
I help leaders on this topic. First is strategy, right? And developing an AI strategy. And oftentimes I'll see people go to, I want to use these tools, or I want to use the latest on AI this, or the latest AI. I want to use agents and just, buzzwords and the latest tools and so on and so forth. Where what they need to start is actually, what are the use cases? So if efficiency is your goal, do a classical breakdown of where the highest cost and where there are opportunities to reduce and make things more efficient and automate and all of that kind of stuff. In many cases, you might not even need AI.
Right.
There's a lot you can achieve with just robotic process automation, or right, like standardization and simplification and all of that, just from an efficiency standpoint, right? So start with kind of, what are you trying to solve for? What's your goal? And where are the highest opportunities? Then, if AI is a solution to one of those opportunities, then you bring in AI, but you don't lead with the hammer. You start with the nail, right? And you figure out, okay, where are my nails? What do I need to fix, right? Then the AI comes in and you can develop an AI strategy, let's say, right? So that's part one. Part two is, okay, I have an AI strategy, but do I have what I need to implement it, especially around data and technology? If I don't have data, then there's a lot of AI I can't build, right? I can't build certain predictive models. I can't build recommendation systems. I can't do skills analysis. I can't do all these things if I don't have great data and great frameworks. And the same with technology, right? Am I going to build this technology internally? Am I going to go buy this externally? Where's the technology? What kind of models? What are we talking about, right? So data and technology then becomes part two of the equation. Part three is then governance, right? And this is what we've been talking about, right? Okay, now that we're going about this, how do I reconcile kind of my strategy and my technology with my governance principles? And there are a set of those, right? Your ethics principles of like, what are your red lines? Where will you use AI? Where won't you use AI? How are we going to monitor the tools and technologies? If I'm using vendors, what do I demand or ask of them from a governance standpoint? There's a whole set of questions that you should be asking of them. Do you know that? Do you have a accountability framework internally? Who's responsible for bringing these products internally and using them and deploy them? Are they just going to leave in 2 years? And if we get sued, we're screwed, right? Like, what happens? Like, what's the accountability framework here? Who are the stakeholders involved? Are we compliant with laws and regulations, right? So there's a whole kind of governance framework that we can, again, drill down, double click on in a few minutes. And then the fourth thing, as I mentioned, is change management. Okay, we're using the AI. Okay, what does that mean? Especially TA is a great example of this, right?
Yeah.
You
Well,
can use,
in HR, that's usually the only ones that are leveraging
well,
AI.
now it's coming into other places, right? Like in talent management, when it comes to like skills, attrition prediction, L&D. I think AI is going to play a huge role in L&D.
Absolutely.
All that kind of stuff. But let's just use recruiting and hiring as an example. From kind of marketing, talent brand marketing, to sourcing, to filtering, to interviewing, to selection, to hiring, that whole funnel, you can use AI in many, many, many aspects of that funnel. Okay. Okay. So then what role do these humans play? What role do you want recruiters to play now? What role do you want hiring managers to play? The role's going to change. And so figuring out that change management and how that role is changing and how AI works with the humans and implementing that change, that's the fourth bucket here, and really going after that change management process, right? So to me, again, it's really starting with use cases and being use case driven to develop your AI strategy, having a data and technology strategy, ensuring you have governance in place, and then change management.
Makes sense. And I like that. It's very clear. And it's funny to me because I in the kind of talking with CHROs, it's like they want to start with the governance. And I like how you say, no, that's step number 3
Yeah, because you
behind the
might not
data.
even do you even know you need AI? Like, and maybe they're on governance because maybe they've already done steps 1 and 2. I don't know, but
No. In these 2 cases I'm thinking about, no, they're like, well, we want to build the governance and then measure the AI against it, which logically makes sense. But I think, your bigger question that you led with is, where do we want to use
yeah,
AI?
exactly.
And I
What
think
AI
that's a
are you even
better
talking about?
start.
Because there's a variety of AI, and
Mm-hmm.
it's helpful to know what exactly we're going after before then you start applying governance to it, right? Now, I
Yeah.
would say developing governance principles and frameworks in conjunction is a good idea. Absolutely, right? In fact, I recommend that to folks. Even if they're early on the AI journey, I tell them, hey, start developing your frameworks. What are your principles around governance, right? And we have best practices that we share with our clients and customers. Because if you're going to wait to do governance for like a couple of years, then it's going to get really hard later. So to
Yeah.
definitely get
Yeah.
started
You don't.
early on with that.
Yeah, and I like that. Coming up with kind of like your North Star in governance, but the 2 that I were talking to, they want to get down almost to the
Super
binary
details.
level, and I'm
Yeah,
like, let's
you're not
time
ready
out,
for
let's
that.
pull
Yeah,
back a little bit.
yeah, yeah.
So, one of the things that I usually suggest to HR professionals is start with the employee experience journey. Just identify all the different touch points, kind of do that whole design thinking thing. And then once you have that picture, then you can start thinking, okay, do we automate this? Or is this something that an AI can take from beginning to end and free up the resource now? Do you think that's a good approach, or am I advising people wrong?
I don't think it's wrong. I would probably tweak it in the following way. I think there's kind of 3 metrics that HR ultimately cares about, right? One is efficiency. One is efficacy. You want the best talent.
Mm-hmm.
And the third is experience, right? And I call them the 3 E's. And so, sometimes there's trade-offs on those things. Maybe you can go give an amazing experience, but that's going to cost you 10x. Well, then maybe I don't do it, right? Or maybe, hey, I'm going to, I can go hire great talent, but that's going to lead to a worse experience or something like that. I'm making
Mm-hmm.
some trade-offs here, right? But like, you're going to have some of those trade-offs. And so therefore, it's just always a strategic decision to figure out where am I constantly balancing those trade-offs. The thing where I think AI is going to be dramatic is I think it can improve on all 3.
Okay.
That's the thing. That's the game changer. I think that's why it's a game changer for HR. AI is going to make HR more efficient. AI has been known to improve on helping identify talent, and AI can provide a better customer experience. I'll tell you right now, like I know many people who've been in the job market and are looking for jobs, and they apply to a company, they never hear back. They talk to recruiters, they never hear back. They don't know what the timeline is or how many interviews, and they think they're done, and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, here's 3 more interviews, and it's
Yeah.
It can be a frustrating process, right? And I don't think that's a great experience. And so
Mm-hmm.
AI can absolutely streamline that, right? It can automate it, can streamline it, can you know exactly when you're, and it can even communicate with you in a very easy way and say, hey, Trent, great interview. Like, we'll go get back to you exactly in 2 days, and this is how it's going to work and process and all that. So it can absolutely improve the experience. It can improve efficiency, and it can improve outcomes and get you better talent. Thing is, it's not automatically going to do those things. And that's why governance matters. You need to monitor these systems. You need to make sure that they're capable of doing those things, but the humans need to ensure that that they're actually achieving those outcomes, that they're reliable, that they're not biased, and all of these things. And that's where, again, that's where they're going to work together. The AI
Yeah.
is going to go automate this stuff. It's going to achieve these things. The humans have to guide, monitor, govern all of that stuff. And that's how the system is going to work together, I think.
So essentially, you manage AI like you would another
I
employee.
think
You give
so.
it the guidelines, and then you measure against it, right?
That's right. That's right. And I think it's going to be easier to measure in some ways. And like we just said before, it's going to be easier to give feedback, right? And so in some ways, it's going to really be a fun process for folks, right? And
Yeah.
again, we're not there yet, but I really do think that's where the world is headed.
Makes sense. So, there's been a lot of change, and I hear conflicting things with the change of guard in Washington, that the wheels are off whenever it comes to governance around AI. The last 4 years it's kind of been let's put some regulation in there, but now it seems like, hey, just everybody take their hands off. What's the truth?
Yeah, look, I don't think it's that. Look, I don't think we were ever going to get much federal guidance, regardless of which administration was in play or which side of
Okay.
the aisle, right? Even the executive order that Biden had passed, I think in October of 23, it was pretty loose. It was a set of principles and it was a set of guidance and it was a framework for, our vision for, hey, we want to govern AI, but we also want to be a world leader. But those are just words, right? Like, how is that like
Right.
actually implemented? Now, they did give some authority to agencies to say, hey, Department of Labor, for your industry, you go do this. For different agencies, for their industries, hey, you go take ownership. But that's all they said is like, you go take ownership now, right? The one specific thing that I think did get overturned was the OMB had gone down a pretty far road of like establishing guardrails for federal agencies and how they need to govern their AI use. And I think that's been overturned. But look, more broadly, for most domain sectors, companies out there, the federal guidance was pretty sparse to begin with, right? And now it's even less, right? And so what I think is going to happen is something that was probably going to happen anyways, but now it's going to happen even faster is states and local regions in the US are going to take on AI compliance, right? And so I think you're going to actually see, you're already starting to see it. You have a bunch of laws, state laws that have been passed, a bunch of city laws that have been passed. And now I think in 2025 and 2026, you're going to see more of that. You have California, New York State, and even Texas that are expected to pass laws. And you add that on top of what Colorado has already passed and a few others. That's a big chunk of the country as well. Washington State and as well is expected to pass something. So now you're talking about some of the biggest economic centers in the U.S. Having some kind of regulations on AI. That's going to happen, I think, at the state level, Trent.
No, I can
And
see
then
that.
the other thing that's going to happen is you're also going to get AI embedded in product level compliance. You're starting to already see that, right? So TVs, for
Mhm.
instance, smart TVs that have AI and are watching you, right? Like there's those industries already have product controls and compliance in place, and they're going to embed AI in those. That doesn't require the federal government to do anything, right? And so you're going to see AI come in geographically, and you're going to see it come in via specific domains, and that has nothing to do with who's in power in Washington, in my view.
Thank you for that, because there's so much noise out there. And I'm
Yeah.
not political. I'm kind of independent. I don't like either side.
Yeah.
But Lord have mercy, trying to get to the truth now it's so
Tough.
laborious. So I appreciate you clearing that up. Um, so I think the kind of the low hanging fruit, whenever HR professionals are looking at AI, is kind of looking at, hey, let's just get a vendor. Let's go get something off the shelf. And you hit on this a little bit earlier about kind of the vendor management aspect of it, but what are some best practices that you'd recommend in evaluating third-party vendors, and kind of like what's the process once you put them in place?
Yeah. So this is something we help clients with, right? This is part of governance, right? And so when you've gone down that road, look, if you are getting a AI technology from a vendor, you cannot absolve yourself of responsibility and risk. You can blame the vendor if something goes wrong. It's on you. There's actually been case law established here, right? So AI, Air Canada, this happened maybe a year or so ago, was sued for their chatbot hallucinating. And a customer sued. It was on some refund policy or something like that. And they went and sued Air Canada. And Air Canada tried to say, hey, no, we used OpenAI's technology. It's not our fault. And they lost. They lost. It's like, it doesn't matter if it's OpenAI's technology or whoever's technology it was. You guys implemented it. You deployed it. It's your responsibility. And so that, I think, has become important precedent. So if you're a buyer of vendor technology, it's on you. And so this goes back to, what is your AI governance? What questions do you need to ask them? And so we have a document, and if it's something I could share with you and you can share with the audience,
Sure.
happy to do
Yeah.
that. But we go through a set of 10 to 12 questions that you should be asking the vendor around kind of what's the data, how's the model trained, what's the data, have they been audited for bias, what laws might be in scope for this thing, what level of risk would they imagine this to have, right? A whole bunch of questions that I think are quite important, and expect some documentation around it. Again, there are a set of things that I get it if a vendor says, hey, that's our secret sauce. But these 10 to 12 questions are not secret sauce questions. They should answer these questions. And if they're not answering them, to me, that would be a red flag.
No, that's great. Yeah, if you can share that, I can drop it in the show notes for sure.
Yeah.
Now, whenever it comes to like the ethical aspect and creating that ethical AI culture, what are some points of advice that you try to offer people? Because that's a huge part of the implementation aspect that you mentioned earlier. And that's also, I know whenever I'm talking AI and HR forums, bias, ethical considerations, it's like you have to get over that hurdle before they'll even listen to your content. So, like, what advice would you give someone who's trying to establish that ethical culture around AI organizationally?
Yeah, I think look, each organization has different considerations around this, right? There's not a one size fits all in terms of where AI is ethical or not ethical. And it goes to, I think, goes to culture. What kind of culture do you have internally? Where do you want to use technology? How do you want to deploy technology? For instance, one of the conversations one might have is how comfortable are you with the use of employee data in a technology? Right? PII in a technology. Different companies have different standards on this, different ethics on this, right? And there's not a absolutely right or wrong answer here, but these are the kinds of questions you need to wrestle with. What level of employee or candidate data do we use in our models? When we use this data, do we notify people that their data is being used? Transparency, right? If a
Yeah,
candidate interacts with our interview system, do we let them know that it's an AI system or not? Transparency, right? What's the level of monitoring that we're going to do on the technology? Is it going to be an annual thing and just kind of check the box? Or are we going to proactively monitor this quarterly to make sure we're not running afoul of any bias or other types of issues, etc.? Right? These are all kind of ethical considerations one would have. And so there's a variety of things. Again, we help clients think through in terms of what are the principles and ethical considerations one should have, what are some best practices, and again, up to the individual organization to figure out how they want to implement it.
makes sense. So I guess, if I'm in, a leadership seat, I'm probably kind of nervous because you've got all this noise and this drive, and this consistent message of you've got to adopt or die. But then in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, whenever the crap hits the fan, uh, what are my measures to kind of do some risk mitigation? So I guess if you were hired to be a CHRO with all your compliance and governance and all that, what would be like your 90-day plan to make sure that you get your department on the right track for all things AI and AI governance?
Yeah. So look, at the end of the day, I think at the core, I'm a innovator, not a governance and compliance person, right? And so I think my mind and heart always goes towards innovation and disruption. But I think what I've realized is if you actually want to move faster, you got to have governance in place, right? And so that's why
And
I
I like how
would
you pair those two together because
exactly.
usually it's oil and water, but you're saying one
Exactly.
is a
And
byproduct
that's
of
the
the other.
thing.
So I love that.
If anyone takes away one thing from this conversation, that's the mindset I want to shift and that's been a big mindset shift for myself over
Yeah.
the last several years. And again, I like to move fast. I like to move fast. I like to build. I like to innovate. But I've realized in order to do that, especially when you're talking about powerful technology, you gotta build trust. The other analogy I gave, I know the automobile analogy, but for instance, nuclear energy, right? Another powerful technology. We've had a couple of accidents, right? The 3 Mile Island incident, etc. It's freaked people out. And people don't trust it. And there's a lot of misinformation around it and so on and so forth. We're seeing something similar with vaccines, right? Where incredibly one of the greatest kind of innovations that mankind has made, but there's a lot of distrust around it now, right? And so when when you don't have trust, it slows things down. It slows things down, right? And so I think that's the takeaway here. And same with AI. It's an incredibly powerful technology. This is going to be one of the greatest inventions mankind has made. And so, but if you want to adopt it, if you want to innovate, if you're an innovator, take governance seriously.
I love that. Innovate first and have the governance to help you move faster. And, I think one of the things, whenever I worked for a bank and, just for the audience, I was always a huge fan of Capital One because they did some crazy shit. Like I was always going, how in the hell did they do that? Like, just their innovative
Yeah,
culture and,
yeah,
and
yeah.
mean, the bank that I worked for was incredibly innovative, but
Okay.
Capital One was like on a different level. Um, but one of the things when we went through that design thinking and that agile transformation, it was a completely different mindset of making sure that at the beginning of something you have all of the stakeholders involved. And I think sometimes people in compliance got a bad rap because something would be built all the way almost getting ready to launch, and then legal and compliance comes in and goes, guys, no, we can't do this. You got to fix this. You got to fix that. And one of the things that we found is that this combative relationship that normally exists, it was greatly diminished whenever they were in the project and
You
throughout
got
the
it.
project.
Yeah. People just want to be heard, and
Absolutely.
different perspectives play an important role in
Yeah.
innovation, right? And
Yeah.
so there's this concept of move fast and break things, but sometimes when you break things, that comes back to haunt you as well. So
It does. And it slows you down.
and it slows you down. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember the first project that we kind of did in this whole agile thing. It was weird because we had this great idea, and then legal and compliance is sitting at the table and going, oh, this is going to be fun. But like by the second or third meeting, they were actually contributing to the
Yeah,
innovation.
yeah,
And it was so fun to kind of watch, like all of us were like, hey, we can do this, like
yeah.
we're not barreling toward a wall and eventually going to try to go around it. We're actually going to just go completely
Together.
over it.
That's
But
right.
yeah,
That's right. That's right.
it was a very different experience.
That's what I
And that,
realized too, because I think I used to fight governance
oh
and compliance until I realized, wait a
yeah,
second, no, this is actually could be rough.
yeah. Well, I'm going to call out PJ Rossi, who was our employee compliance at the bank. She would always use me as an example in compliance training. Go, Trent doesn't know compliance. And finally, one time I just stopped her. I said, I do know compliance because I can walk that knife's edge of what to do and what not to
Right.
do. So I've got
Right.
to know it in order
Right.
to know where that line is.
That's right.
You and I don't always agree because you take a very,
That's right. And that's fine.
right
That's fine.
approach, and that's okay.
That's okay.
Um, and I think that's the other thing is understanding that innovation, that there's some good tension because that tension helps move that innovation forward, but it doesn't need to be among the group, you know? So I love that you kind of position that innovation is closely tied to the governance. So when you're working with your clients, kind of like what you're working on now, are there certain like hot topics that clients and prospects are coming to you going, hey, what do we do here?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is we're doing some really innovative work around bias testing. Like for instance, how do you test for
Mm,
bias in a large language model? When you're doing a chatbot interaction or whatever, how do we test for that? And we have some really cool IP and technology to be able to test for that and maybe even fix it. So you can just kind of start using these technologies without bias. So that's one area that we've been helping customers with. Another area is around vendor governance. We just talked about, right? How do I manage that whole process? What questions should I ask? I get, all these documents. How do I review these documents? And so just the kind of the simplification and automation of kind of vendor governance management is another big area. And then the third is just the compliance management, right? Like, hey, I got these 30 applications, 50 applications. I know I'm a multinational company. There's these laws out there. Help me figure out what's happening. It's all changing so fast. And so our platform helps you do that. So our technology helps you do all those things. It helps you run tests and monitor your models. It helps you manage your vendor risk, and it helps you ensure that you're compliant with laws and regulations across all your different applications, even as the laws change and even as your models change, right? All of
right.
that change, it's automatically kind of updating you on what needs to happen. So those are kind of some of the big buckets of what we're helping companies with.
Well, and especially for multinational, that has to be a relief because I know
Yeah.
managing multinational teams, I would get confused as to which was a Canadian law, which was an EU law, and which was an EMEA law. Like, so having someone kind of ride co-pilot and be able to keep me out of the ditch would be, that'd be awesome.
Exactly. That's the
Um,
thing.
so,
That's right.
so I want to pick on one thing that you said. You were talking about bias.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, 99% of the time, I always get a question about bias. And I guess kind of my stance is all of us have bias, but at least with AI, I'll be able to recognize it because I can run a test against it. And then I always think that you can actually go in and fix it. I've been challenged on that, but I just heard you say, hey, we can identify it and fix it. So can you kind of, without sharing any IP, but like, how do you fix that? Because
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's a black box for a lot of people who are not technical.
yeah, absolutely. So to your first point, absolutely, you can go identify it, right? Like humans are very
Mm-hmm.
rarely admit that they're biased, right? So it's always hard to like tease that out. with AI systems, you can run these tests and evaluate the output and see what's going on there, right? So it's easy to run those tests, and that's what we do. That's where we started, right? And you can do that for machine learning algorithms or for LLMs. It's not so hard. Fixing it is a little hard, right? Especially for classical machine learning models, predictive models, which is what people might have heard of. Any kind of machine learning model that does predictions, like hiring predictions, ranking candidates, and that kind of stuff. Fixing it is a little bit harder there. But in the LLM space, which we're talking about with kind of these OpenAI and DeepSeek and Claude and all these other things, this is something we're working on, taking different approaches using fine tuning, prompt engineering, redaction to see, how do we fix this, right? So again, AI doesn't automatically fix bias, right? AI can be biased, humans can be biased. Humans can be biased and not biased, AI can be not biased, right? Like it's not naturally one or the other. But what you can do with AI systems is you can go and monitor it better and more easily. You can monitor it in a more consistent way. You can test it in a more consistent way. You can potentially mitigate and even fix things in a more consistent way. So those are some of the benefits of both the technology, but then the governance of the technology as well.
And on the predictive side, I think, your earlier point about the data, if you've had bias in your hiring and your recruiting process for years, it should be no surprise that you're going to have bias in your forecasting,
That's right.
And I don't think it's very simple, but I don't think people really just kind of stop and go, okay, well, that does make sense. There is bias there, but it's not the AI's fault.
I've heard people say AI is going to make bias worse. And then I've heard people also say, oh, AI is going to fix all bias. And both are not true. Both are not true. And so that's where governance comes in. You could have AI that makes human bias worse. You could have that. You could also have AI that is less biased than humans. That could also happen, and it's entirely dependent on your governance. That's why governance is so important. And so are you monitoring these things? Are you intervening? How are you using this? What kind of data are you putting in? All of this comes together for making it less biased and perform better than it otherwise might.
That's awesome. And again, manage it like you would another employee. Yeah. Inspect what you expect.
Yeah.
So, well, I love this. And for the audience, I think that you are probably sitting in going, okay, I never thought that I would be this interested in governance and all of that, but that is just how excitable
I'm the excitable governance guy. There you go.
You are, but you just bring so much passion and just it's you present it in such a way as like just kind of common sense, and it's refreshing because a lot of people in the space try to kind of talk down to you a little bit, and I mean the several times that I've talked to you, you don't do that. So
the thing that excites me the most, Trent, is trust and innovation. And those things really excite me, and you're not going to get those without governance. And so that took me some time in my career to get to that point and realize that. But that's an insight, and that's why I'm excited by governance now. So
I love it, and it makes sense. So you ready for some rapid fire questions?
I'm curious. All right, let's go.
All right, what is a book that changed your perspective on business?
The Enigma of Reason. Can I give two books maybe? The Enigma of Reason is one. It's a dense book, but ultimately gets out into it kind of changed my entire perspective on human rationality, right? And how humans think they're rational or how humans think they're logical, but almost everything is motivated reasoning. And so then it changed how I then approach how I influence people. So it might seem kind of academic, but it actually is completely changed how I influence people and how I try to persuade people and so on and so forth. So that was a big one. It's called The Enigma of Reason, but it's changed a lot of my perspectives on how I interact with people. So that's one. Number two is a book called Rage. And it's about, it kind of confirms some of my own hypotheses I have, which is, this is something we talk about in HR, right? Like when you're hiring for someone, do you go hire someone who has the specific skills for that job? Or do you go hire a general athlete? You know what I'm talking about? And I'm much more of the persuasion of the latter. And Range talks about that. Range talks about the concept of general athletes, what they bring to the table, why they end up being great hires. And so even someone, and one of the really interesting things in the data over the years that we've seen is having experience in a field is not predictive of success in the field. And so being a specialist can be good in some ways, but it's also a detriment in other ways. And so this kind of trade-off between a specialist versus a general athlete that's a really interesting concept, and I have some real thoughts on that. And that book was pretty cool in discussing that as well.
Yeah, I have to check that one out because I have probably better half of my leadership career. I have always taken the stance I would rather train than untrain. I can train all day long. I have the energy to do it.
Yes.
But untraining someone is like an hour into it. I'm just like, all right, why are you working here? So
Trent,
definitely.
I love that point. I talk about this all the time. It's easier. An important part of learning is actually unlearning. Mm-hmm. Most people don't realize that. And it's unlearning is harder than learning. And which is, again, we could have a whole other conversation about this, but I just want to plus one your point on that.
Well, I appreciate it. I've actually got someone that I went from, let's see, 7th grade all the way through part of college together. She is a clinical psychologist. And I told her, I said, hey, in some of my coaching, I have noticed that a lot of people are leading from trauma. I said, I've got some experience with that, but I'd like to bring on somebody. So she's going to come on. And she said, that most of her coaching on the executive side is exactly what you're talking about. Unlearning. Teaching people how to unlearn. How do you unlearn those behaviors that you grew up with? So that was a great call out. Do you have a favorite podcast or series that's just kind of like your go-to?
I don't think I have a favorite one. There's a lot that I listen to. Maybe I'll start listening to yours more, especially the one where you bring her on. I'd love to listen to that one on unlearning.
Oh, yeah. She's going to be a good one.
Yeah. There's a lot of podcasts I listen to. I mean, across the board, human capital is just a topic that I'm passionate about. And I just thought about just the example that we just talked about, generalists versus specialists and how to think about unlearning and learning. And but then it kind of delves into aspects of psychology and neuroscience. And so I definitely listen to that stuff as well. Probably do more reading than podcasts, Trent. Okay. I like a good book and I read a lot. But the areas that I read often are, again, around talent, around economics, around kind of the human brain and kind of what differentiates us, human reasoning. And I talked to you about that as well and how humans think. And this is something, again, I'd love to leave people with is I think everyone thinks they're rational and that everyone else is not rational. And obviously that can't be true. You can't be the one rational person and everyone else is not rational, right? And so what really is the case is 99.9% of our reasoning is motivated reasoning. We've already kind of we already have a view on something and we work backwards to justify that view. And once you realize that's how we all work, yourself and everyone else, it changes how you interact with people. And so that's another thought I'd love people to explore.
So that kind of gets down to the root of self-awareness too.
Yeah, self-awareness. That's right.
Again, it's just something I'm kind of like, okay, are you aware of who you are today? Let's start there. So where can people find and engage with you?
Yeah, appreciate it. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn. You can come find me on LinkedIn. And then you can reach out to me on via my email, guru@fairnow.ai, if you want to reach out and talk about any of these topics, especially governance, especially AI. Obviously, happy to chat. And then www.fairnow.ai is our website, and you can reach out there as well.
And you're speaking at a conference soon, aren't you?
A couple conferences. Yeah. So you'll see me out there on a couple different speaking tours. I'll be at HR Transform. I'll be at the Wharton People Analytics Conference. I'll be speaking at a couple different conferences in the upcoming weeks and months.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to trade cell phones because I am 70% sure. I'm an ambassador for Transform, and I'm just trying to make sure that I can get the scheduling and everything to work because I got to speak in Boston 2 weeks after that. So I don't want my CEO going, do you work for us or do you work for them? So I got to kind of balance that out. But if I'm at Transform, we'll have to connect for sure in person. So what is your one-liner, your mic drop moment? Something that kind of summarizes everything that we talked about today.
Yeah, it's governance creates trust and trust creates innovation and speed.
Love it. I could have bet a paycheck that that's where you were going, but wanted you to say it anyway. Well, Guru, thank you so much. I know I learned a lot, and I hope the audience did too. And I'm sure that as things keep changing, I'll probably have to have you back on and go, all right, what has changed since the last time we talked?
Yeah, the rate of change of this technology is just incredible, Trent. So I'm sure we'll be chatting. So thanks for having me.
All right, sounds great.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Human Capitalist. This channel is all about community, so comment, subscribe, and join the conversation. This is Trent Cotton, your human capitalist, signing off. Remember, invest in yourself, own your potential, and keep building your own human capital. I'll see you next time.